hope you hear me now. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Corin. I'm a senior developer for organizational and social work environment at the Institute of Stress Medicine since 4 weeks. So today I will take the opportunity to present some of the results from my thesis, which I defended this spring at the University of Gothenburg. It has a fairly long title, but it's about job demands, job resources, and consequences for managerial sustainability in the public sector. And it has a contextual approach, which I will have to talk about a bit today. The thesis was part of the Chefs project, which I guess you have heard about a bit before. And I would like to take 20 minutes to try and summarize my thesis, give you some short insights, and I hope that we can have more discussions later on these 2 days. But let's start from the beginning. It has been argued that the understanding of managerial work as a context-bound practice is underestimated in management research and theory. With this backdrop, I've applied a contextual approach in my thesis. To try and describe it short, it means a deliberate shift in focus from managers and their behaviors and differences to the context and the conditions that they work under. And in context, I mean both the context most proximal to them, their psychosocial working conditions, but also the organizational setting and structure and how that influenced their work. Of course, this focus poses some demands on the theoretical framework, but also the sample and methods used, and I will try to walk you through that. A useful theoretical framework that allows for taking the manager's specific work characteristics into account was found in the job demand resources model, as I'm sure many of you are aware of. It's based on insights from several decades of work stress in the work stress field, of course, and it extends and integrates previous balance models, such as the job demand control model and effort reward imbalance model, and takes a balanced approach in explaining negative as well as positive outcomes. But unlike previous models, the job demand resource model can be adapted and tailored to the specific setting and study group. So using the job demand resources a bit more inclusive design, it's possible to study a broad array of job demands and job resources relevant for public sector managers. And as I mentioned earlier, it also poses some demands on the sample and methods used. In this case, we used a 2-stage sample of organizations and managers in order to enable both cross-level and a comparative design. And organizational variants such as type of municipalities, spans of control, the number of subordinates per manager, as well as manager's position were addressed, but also diversity in gender, age, and managerial experience, in order to discover eventual structuring factors that affect the possibility that female and male managers, young and old managers, experienced and inexperienced managers end up in different types of work situations. So in total we had 7 municipalities, 28 departments, 37 operations, and almost 800 managers in this sample. The sample was also accompanied by instruments and measures specifically tailored for public sector managers. I could talk about that for some hours here, but we'll mention it short. Data were collected within 3 interconnected research projects, where Chefs was the largest one. Data were collected through questionnaires, interviews, but also documents and registers, calendars, which provide both subjective appraisals and more objective assessments on data on several levels. I've also used different contextual, quantitative as well as qualitative methods in order to answer the research questions. Cluster analysis in order to identify variations in work situations within the larger context, and also multi-level analysis, which I guess Malin will talk a bit more about later, in order to take into account how factors at different levels affect outcomes. I've also used work content analysis in ARIA in order to make external assessments of the manager's job content, but also working conditions. And please stop, give me your thoughts and questions if you have any. Although the studies including this thesis, which are 4, have their own focus and research questions, each study has been about managers' job demands and job resources. That's the core. So behind me, you have a scale indicating the job resources and job demands that have been investigated in different ways. And they're based on previous research on managerial working conditions. Before I turn to some of the main results, which is the main purpose here today, I would like to take the opportunity to define sustainability. This is always a complicated concept to use, especially within the research community. It can be overused in some ways. However, in this thesis, it has been a good way to denote the consequences of the work environment for public managers in their everyday work. So different aspects of health, performance, motivation, and turnover has been chosen as main indicators of sustainability, which means that a sustainable manager is defined as a manager who is able to, health and performance-wise, as well as wants to work as a manager in the long term. So there can be some main conclusions regarding managerial working conditions and their consequences. First, I've seen that public sector managers work in a very wide array of different work situations, including balanced as well as unbalanced psychosocial working conditions. More specifically, we found 8 distinct clusters of managerial working conditions with different combinations of job demands and job resources. We also found that an unbalance between job demands and job resources was a reality for a very large part of the managers. Roughly 60% had an unbalanced or highly unbalanced work situation with high demands and low resources. We could also find that the balance between job demands and job resources had consequences, of course, for the sustainability in terms of managers' health, performance, motivation, and plans for the future. But the results also suggest that the association between psychosocial working conditions and sustainability are not necessarily linear. Different roads and different combinations of job demands and job resources can lead to similar outcomes. So there's no one size fits all. Interestingly, we also find that diverse psychosocial working conditions and the consequences are not randomly distributed. So there was a differentiation between work situations for several organizational and structuring factors. I would like to highlight some of the most important here. As you saw in the beginning, I've compared different types of services, human services in school settings and in care settings, but also technical services. And we found that managers in human service organizations, which are mainly female-dominated, were generally found to work under worse working conditions. Especially so in the care settings, where the managers were particularly exposed. And it was often problems related to their own employees, lack of support, combined with large amount of employee-related problems like conflicts and difficult cases of rehabilitation and such. One big part of my thesis, or one study, was about managers' span of control, the number of subordinates that you're responsible for. We found that managers in the human services had almost twice as many subordinates as managers in technical services. And in a multi-level study, we found that the number of subordinates increases managers' job demands. The workload increases, the problems related to the managerial role increases, as well as problems related to the relationships with subordinates. But it was also found that span of control is of equal importance for managers in human services as well as technical services. So why there's such a big difference between these types of services can be questioned. There is also some results related to the managerial position, where first-line managers, and particularly then within the human services, generally worked under more unbalanced psychosocial working conditions. And they especially experienced a lack of support from their upper management. They also acted as a buffer between levels, between the upper management and the subordinates, to a much larger extent than other managers. Regarding gender, male managers generally worked under more reasonably balanced psychosocial working conditions than their female managers did. However, the female managers stayed in their position despite these unfavorable working conditions to a much larger extent. It was also the case that more inexperienced and younger managers were more likely to end up in these unbalanced work situations. They also displayed a highly elevated risk of wanting to leave the workplace as well as their profession, as well as actually leaving. So here's a problem and real challenge for the public sector and the human resource departments, and politicians as well. So it can be concluded that the type of service that managers work in, the span of control, the number of subordinates they have, the position they work in, as well as gender, age and experience, all seem to provide some explanations for the very large variations in psychosocial working conditions and their consequences. Besides new knowledge on managerial working conditions, the thesis has also had an aim to extend the job demand resource model. It has done so by studying a group that has rarely been studied in this field before, but it has mainly been done by using contextual methods. By doing so, the results from this thesis contributes in its way to answer several of the future challenges that have been identified by EADR scholars. It means adding knowledge to the currently very limited information on how naturally occurring constellations of job demands and job resources and their joint effects on outcomes. It also means identifying potentially hazardous psychosocial work situations and extending the individual level approach and finding why job demands and job resources are high or low. It also means ways to more elaborately and objectively assess job demands and job resources. The third aim of the thesis was applicability, using these types of resources in practice. And we found that a contextual approach is applicable in identifying a diversity of psychosocial work situations, which is very important since it helps to avoid generalization to all public sector managers. They work in very diverse situations. And comparisons lead to deeper knowledge by identifying where and whom these situations are most prevalent, which is crucial for targeting specific groups with specific needs. But it's also important, which we also have met in practice, that it's possible to be inspired by the balanced work situations, promoting sustainable psychosocial working conditions. It's also the case that the results highlight that sustainable as well as unsustainable work situations can be constituted in different ways. There's not one size that fits all. You can have a balanced work situation that looks a bit different from others. So they come in different packages. But there's also a large variation between as well as within workplaces in working conditions, which means that it's possible to form sustainable working conditions for managers in all types of services, both human services and technical services. And it's important to highlight that the results support the demand for organizational interventions and work redesign rather than changes in behaviors and mindsets, which we hope will give valuable insights to practitioners who wish to improve the working conditions for managers. And I don't have time to give them all to you now, but the results lead to several suggestions for improvements of job demands and optimizing job resources for managers. Thank you. If you'd like to read more about my work, the link leads to the thesis. And you can also email me if you would like a copy or discuss some of these questions further. So, thank you.